Greetings, peoples of the interwebs, Jake here, and here's another review of Rings of Power, Episode 4. And oh boy, do we have ourselves a doozy of an episode. So, like the last review that I did of episodes 1 through 3, I took notes to kind of keep myself better on track than my normal rambly ways. So, let's start off. Okay, so we begin back in London, and Elrond is basically talking to Galadriel. He's assembling his team to go to Celebrimbor in Eregion to basically warn him that Sauron is, could be lurking around doing Sauron-y evil things. And for whatever reason, they're only allotted like 5 people. I don't know why they're only allowed to take such a small and arbitrary number, because, you would think that with Sauron being a threat, even though apparently he's not a threat, because Gil-galad was just like, oh, he's just one dude and no army, so pass, just send a messenger, which, that was their first mistake. But then also, the fact that, again, Gil-galad was just kind of like, yeah, okay, I'll let you send your people, but I'm only going to give you, you can only take 5. It's like, okay, so this is Sauron, Morgoth's chief lieutenant. He's committed tons and tons of heinous atrocities against the elves and any other living being in Middle-earth. Yet, for whatever reason, this show keeps trying to... I don't know if it's intentionally trying to humanize him, but whatever their rationale is, they're making Sauron just appear very weak and really not that big of a threat. But that's a whole other thing. So I guess, I don't know, I guess in the context of this show and how Sauron's depicted, then, yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense, because Sauron apparently can't do shit, so, alright, yeah, go send 5 people, whatever, that's fine. Okay, so then they mention a location on the map, or several different locations of, their travel itinerary to get to Eregion, and they mention the Evil Hills. I forget what the name is in Elvish, but they mention that the hills are evil. So even before they arrived in the area, I knew what hills they were talking about, which I'll get into that later. But basically, in my notes, I just put Evil Hills ? Nope, and then I'll get to that later. So then, I think probably one of my favorite scenes in this episode, and maybe in the entire series, is Galadriel just flat out gets ignored. Elrond ain't having any of her shit, and I don't blame him, because she's literally the cause of all their problems. So I totally get why Elrond is just like, shut up, Galadriel, I'm in charge, go away. And it makes sense why everyone's just constantly talking down to her, being very demeaning, because she's the worst. So, love that scene. Good on you, Elrond. So then we jump over back to Rune, and Discount Gandalf finds Tom Bombadil. Okay, so here's where we're starting to get to the doozy of this episode and why it's so fucking stupid and goes against the lore and just completely ignores everything, as they are, as they tend to do. But alright, so here's the thing. So Tom Bombadil only resided in the Old Forest, which was a little outside of the Shire. A little, I guess, kind of in between the Shire and Bree. But Tom Bombadil, that was his domain. And they do, I'll give them credit, they did get a few things right with Tom Bombadil, in the sense that he is the eldest. That's what he's referred to as. And the line that he says, where he was there, the first raindrops, the first blades of grass, all that stuff, that actually is taken from the books. So, someone apparently had actually read the books. And was like, oh, hey, let's add this in there, because that's actually in the books. Now, Tom Bombadil not being in Rune, complete bullshit. No, Tom Bombadil was never in Rune. So, this is one of those things to me that keeps bothering me, is where the show, it's trying so hard, yet simultaneously it's not trying hard enough. Because they keep pulling up these references to locations or character names that fans who have read the books, very, very familiar with the books and the lore, we're going to recognize, mentions of like Balerion or Ulmo or Manwë, some of the Valar, and some of these other kind of, deep cut references. So it's like they're trying to appeal to us with these deep cut references, but at the same time blatantly ignoring the rest of the lore. So it's clearly not appealing to us. And then the casual fans, these names mean nothing to them. Anytime they mention like Morgoth, or again the Valar like Ulmo or Manwë, Ivana, or Balerion. These names mean nothing to the casual people who don't know anything about the First Age or just haven't done a deep dive into Tolkien's lore. Which, again, further perplexes me on who this show is even for. But that's a whole other rant that I'm going to try to just stop myself on there before I but yeah, so again, Tom Bombadil only resided in the Old Forest. What he's doing in Rhûn, we don't know, but it's dumb. Tom Bombadil should not be in Rhûn. So then, after their brief encounter, we go to the Harfoots. Somehow Poppy and Nori survive, unfortunately. They survive after being swept up in a sandstorm. Harfoots. And then we get another Harfoot, which turns out they're not Harfoots, they're Stores, and a possible love interest of Poppy. I can't sigh loud enough and roll my eyes enough at that scene, and just the more of these fake hobbits. So Stores. All right. So here's another thing too, and I think I mentioned this in my season 1 review. Is so hobbits were actually there are 3 different kind of offshoots of hobbits, or technically there were 3 before they kind of became collectively known as hobbits. But anyways, so there were the Stores, Harfoots, and Foulhides. However, the hobbits didn't really come into being until probably around the Third Age. The very mysterious Tolkien didn't really write a whole lot about the hobbits and their origins or anything like that, but we do know that he did write that they originated in the Vales of the Anduin, so basically in between Mirkwood and the Misty Mountains, in that general vicinity. And there were 3 different types of hobbits, we'll say. And again, the Stores, which they were a bit more stout in their build, kind of, and they actually, again, one thing I'll give them credit for, so the Stores actually did kind of build, if I remember correctly, the Stores were the first ones that kind of built homes, like, in hillsides and stuff like that. And they spent more time around the dwarves, which I think is partially why they maybe have some, possibly where they learned to, like, dwell in the earth. Pure speculation on my part, though. So the Foulhides were a little bit taller, and they kind of hung out more with the elves, and then the Harfoots kind of hung out more with humans. But anyways, they eventually moved west and became collectively known as hobbits. That's a whole other thing. So again, I will give them credit for Stores. Yes, they do typically build in earthen mounds. But again, there's nothing to suggest that the hobbits, whether they be the Stores, Foulhides, Harfoots, any of them, ever ventured east into Rhûn. So what are they doing here? It's like they didn't listen to any of the criticism from the first season, where I don't think anyone really cared for the whole Harfoot subplot. And even the people who did, you could cut all that stuff out of the story, and it changes nothing about the season at all. It would just ever so slightly improve it, because we don't have to deal with the Harfoots. But yeah, so of course we have more hobbits in Rhûn, because it's Lord of the Rings. Got to have those hobbits. So after that, so this is another thing that's kind of been bothering me too. Is so once they mention that like they're looking for their friend who's a wizard, the Stores are kind of like gasping and awing and stuff like that at the mention of a wizard. The problem is, well, one of many problems. How do they know what a wizard is, though? Because in the Dark Wizard, who I'm assuming is Saruman, keeps referring to Discount Gandalf is the Istar, so the Istar, that is what the wizards were known as, the Istari, which basically just means wizard. So, and again, the wizard shouldn't even be here in the Second Age. But, so, if Gandalf, Discount Gandalf, if he's presumably the first wizard to arrive in the west of Middle-earth, because I guess Saruman's been chilling there for a while, how would the people in the west know what a wizard is? And again, admittedly, this is maybe a bit of a nitpicky thing, but it's just one of those weird lore aspects and things that kind of bugs me, is how do these people know what a wizard is, or what the significance of that word even means? So, I don't know. That bugs me. Again, could be the minority, could just be very nitpicky here. And there's so many bigger issues to worry about, but it bugs me. Moving on. So, Bombadil saves Discount Gandalf. I can't even read my own handwriting. And, saves Discount Gandalf, and then basically is a repeat from the Two Towers when Merry and Pippin get swallowed by the tree when in the extended edition of the Two Towers, when Treebeard drops them off in I'm trying to remember the name of it in the books. Dingledurg or some Durg Dingle, I think, is the name of Treebeard's home, basically. Which actually, that scene, fun fact, is a kind of what should have happened earlier in the Fellowship, because in the Fellowship, that is basically what happened with Old Man Willow when the hobbits got captured by Old Man Willow, this old tree, and Tom Bombadil came to save them. So they kind of took that and repurposed it for Treebeard. So I thought that was kind of a nice little nod to Tom Bombadil, since he was cut out entirely of the Lord of the Rings movies. But anyways, back on track. So they basically took that exact scene, and I'll say this makes a little bit more sense because it is Tom Bombadil, but it's almost like the writers are kind of like, hey, so let's take that scene from the books with Tom Bombadil, but actually make it with Tom Bombadil instead of Treebeard. So again, it's like they're jingling the keys to the Lord of the Rings fans. I mean, like, hey, Tom Bombadil, he's a character from the books. He's never been featured in live action. Don't you love Tom Bombadil? Tom Bombadil, don't you love the fact that we're giving you this character? Tom Bombadil! And I don't give a shit about Tom Bombadil in the context of this show, because he doesn't make sense in this show. And honestly, it's fascinating as a character he is in the books. There's a reason why he's been cut out of every adaptation, whether it be the Ralph Bakshi version or the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings. He does not drive the narrative forward. But for whatever reason, the showrunners, the writers were like, this is a good time for Tom Bombadil to be in a place he never should be in. Jesus. So we get Tom being Tom, Discount Gandalf asking him questions like, and then Tom just giving like very Tom answers, which hats off to the actor. He seems to be kind of playing the role sort of like he is in the books, maybe less. I feel like Tom in the books should, or the actor should be playing Tom a bit more like the books, where he's more kind of bubbly and jovial and just very unbothered by anything. But again, the actor seems like he's making some effort to bring Tom to life, so okay, fair enough. So we go, but again, the problem is Tom's in Rune, which he shouldn't be, and then also Discount Gandalf trying to be like, oh, you should teach me about magic. You should, instruct me in the ways of the world. That's not Tom. Tom does not give a shit about Middle-earth and any of its problems. Tom just cares about Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, his wife, and gathering lilies for her. And not in like a cold-hearted way he doesn't care. It's just outside of Tom's domain, doesn't care. He's a very wistful character, and yeah, just as long as nothing is going wrong with his domain, doesn't matter. So the fact that they're trying to have Tom Bombadil be like this mentor type figure to Discount Gandalf, again, just completely goes against the lore. But yeah, then again, this show really has a good habit of going against the lore. So I can't say I'm surprised. So after that, he also talks about the Dark Wizard controlling Rune. And So another thing that I wanted to kind of bring up, so I actually have read an interesting theory about the two, the about Discount Gandalf and then this Dark Wizard, which I'm assuming is Saruman. But the theory states that if they're going by the lore of the two blue wizards, which again Tolkien kind of changed his mind with the two blue wizards, but one of the original drafts, I think it was his original draft, is the two blue wizards did arrive in Middle Earth in the Second Age, and they went east and south. And in that draft, he talks about how the wizards, because basically the point of the five wizards was to counteract Sauron. However, in that original draft, he talked about how the two blue wizards failed in their task and that they became like leaders of cults and kind of dark magic users and stuff like that. So the theory states that this dark wizard is one of the blue wizards who failed his task, whereas Discount Gandalf is going to be the other blue wizard who stayed true, because in the revised draft of the two blue wizards, Tolkien changed his mind, and that even though they still failed their task, he believed that they actually did contribute a lot in weakening Sauron's grasp in the East, which was where kind of his center base for the longest time. That's why the Easterlings, Haradrim, and other people, that's really all they knew was Sauron and his influence. I think that's actually a cool theory. My problem, though, is I don't think the writers are clever enough to do that. I don't think that's happening at all. I would be truly shocked if that's actually what happens. But I'm pretty sure they're putting... Again, Discount Gandalf is Gandalf, and then this Dark Wizard is Saruman. Which, again, Saruman didn't even start to become evil until kind of the latter part of the Third Age. Even though he did go east. He went with the two blue wizards, Alatar and Pelundo. But Saruman didn't start to kind of become corrupted by the lust for power in the ring until much later. So the fact that he's already evil at this point, again, whatever. The show does not care about the lore at all. So then Tom also mentions that he's a wanderer. Again, not true. He only stayed in the Old Forest within that vicinity. That's it. So, lies. More lies. So then, Discount Gandalf is given task to confront the two evils of the Dark Wizard and Sauron. Again, why Tom Bombadil is the one that's telling him this, I don't know. But it's dumb. And then, okay, so we then go back to Elrond, Galadriel, and the red-shirt elves. I don't understand why they're on foot, because they clearly have, like, a long distance to travel. They even mentioned that. But they're traveling by foot, so it'd still be a long journey if you took, horses or horse-drawn carriage. But it'd definitely be significantly faster than by foot. But for whatever reason, this journey they need to use all haste, they're walking by foot. I thought that was weird and dumb, but it tracks with this show. Okay, so here's where we circle back to the Evil Hills. So they mentioned that they're known as the Barrow Downs. So the Barrow Downs are a real location in Lord of the Rings and in Tolkien. However, the Barrow Downs don't become known as such until the Third Age. So, bit of a history lesson here with the Barrow Downs and the Barrow-wights. So this is after so Sauron's he's rebuilding himself in Mordor, and in the meantime, he's had the Witch King of Angmar basically kind of help weaken the forces of men. And at this point in Arnor, which Arnor is the sister kingdom to Gondor, so both kingdoms founded by the exiles of Númenóreans. And so basically, the Barrow Downs, which they did get this right in the show, where they were mounds built for the nobility of the Arnorian, kings, queens, and other nobles. But again, this is a few thousand years too early, and also the Barrow-wights were created or resurrected by the Witch King. Now, that's not to say that Sauron couldn't have brought forth the Barrow-wights, because Sauron taught the Witch King his craft So Sauron could easily, bring forth the Barrow-wights or any kind of undead. I don't think there's any question about that. Again, it's just the fact that the Barrow-wights and Barrow Downs are several thousand years too early. And that also brings up the question of, okay, so, again, in the lore, the Númenóreans, they're the ones who built Gondor, built Arnor, and later the tombs in the Barrow Downs. I would think that if the Númenóreans, which they should be at this, or they should have established their colonies at this point in the timeline, but again, this show has no consistency with the timeline at all. So if the Númenóreans didn't do that, which I would assume that if, in the context even of this show, had the Númenóreans built those, the Barrow Mounds, Galadriel, Elrond, one of the elves probably would have known that, would have brought that up. Instead, they just mentioned that, they're these ancient ruins of men. So if it wasn't the Númenóreans or their descendants who built them, the show doesn't care, they don't elaborate, they just wanted to add Barrow-wights and the Barrow Downs, because again, it's another one of those jingling the keys. It's like, oh hey, you didn't get to see the Barrow-wights or Barrow Downs in the Lord of the Rings movies, here you go, fans, love us, because we're giving you what you want. No, you're not, you're giving us absolute garbage. But anyways, so that's a big problem with the Barrow-wights and the Barrow Downs, and then also the weapons that they use is kind of accurate. So again, the Númenóreans, or the Arnorians at this point, they were used to fighting the Witch King and his kind of undead servants. They crafted weapons specifically meant to combat them. That's actually the weapon, the sword in the books that that Tom Bombadil gives the hobbits. And when Merry stabs the Witch King in the back of the knee, that kind of dispels that the magic around the Witch King and allows Eowyn to basically deliver the final blow. In the movies, that's Aragorn who gives them swords that are just kind of regular swords. But anywho, so again, kind of right, but they weren't weapons. Because I think in the show they said that it could only be weapons located within the tombs of the Barrow-wights that could harm them. I mean, that's not as egregious of a lore change. I'd be okay with that, honestly. If this was a better adaptation, but to call Rings of Power an adaptation is still an insult. But anywho, so yeah, Barrow Downs, Barrow-wights, way too early. Also, how does Galadriel know what the Barrow-wights are? Because again, just the timeline, nothing makes sense. And yeah, so okay, so then we go to the Southlands, or around Pelargir, that general area. Arndir, Isildur, and Estrid, they're all looking for Theo, and Arndir kind of points out obvious, oh hey, these tracks aren't orc tracks. It's like, yeah, I would hope orcs aren't that big, but they follow him, and then we get Estrid being shady. There's a touching moment with Isildur, literally, and their attempt at emotionally, but I don't really get why these characters have attraction to each other, other than the fact that, yeah, okay, they're attractive people, but there doesn't seem to be any emotional attachment to these characters. But whatever, they're trying to add a romance in there, so whatever, who cares? So then Arndir interrogates Estrid because obviously he catches on that she's pretty suspicious, and sure enough, no surprise to anyone, she was a member of Adar's little cult, or had his mark. So again, surprise to no one, but they take her captive and take her with them to go find Theo. Then after that, we go to Isildur sinking along with Arondir, and then before I even wrote in my notes "saved by Estrid," I was like, yeah, she's gonna come save him and kind of redeem herself and prove her loyalty to him, I guess. Then a weird word monster comes out of the mud. Apparently it's one of the nameless ones. So I'm kind of mixed on this with the nameless one, because on one hand, the statement that Arondir states is truth. The nameless ones, they dwell far beneath the earth, and like even Gandalf mentions in the books after his fight with the Balrog, he saw some of the nameless things that like they're so old that not even Sauron knows about them. I don't know how Arondir would know about them, because Gandalf makes sense because he's a Maiar. He's been around since like the beginning of time, so it makes sense that he would know about them after he discovered them, chasing after the Balrog in the deep depths of the earth. And once he was re-embodied as Gandalf the White with more knowledge compared to Gandalf the Grey. How Arondir knows, don't know. Again, I think this is just the writers being like, oh hey, deep cut lore reference, fans will love it. And even though Tolkien never really describes a whole lot about like the nameless things, what they look like, or anything like that, other than they dwell deep in the earth. This creature doesn't seem like it's dwelling deep in the earth. It's pretty close to the surface. So that's where I'm a little mixed. Where like in concept, I don't like. Sure, they could look like big weird worm creatures. That's kind of cool. Why is it so close to the surface of the earth? Don't know. Other than just manufactured drama, which this show loves to do. So then after that, stores, I feel like are just like the Harfoots, where they've got Nori, Poppy, and other dude tied up, and they're just kind of like, yeah, we're just, you're a threat because you're kind of this unknown quantity, so we're just gonna let you go. We're just gonna abandon you out in the desert to fend for yourself. Because basically the Harfoots, as much as they claim that their hearts are as big as their feet and no one goes off trail, as soon as you're a minor inconvenience to them, they kick you out of their caravan and leave you to die. So I guess there's at least some consistency there, that all the hobbits are terrible, terrible little people. And then again, like this lame bullshit story about like the stores and Harfoots and just utter nonsense. Utter complete nonsense. So then Galadriel still believe in like the ring is leading her, and she sees like a vision of like stuff and more Galadriel stuff. And then flip back to the south, and Isildur being dumb and trusting Estrid. Not a smart move. Not a smart move at all. Then we go to Ints, because we get to see some of the Ints. So, that was kind of cool. Yeah, I like the Ints. Visually, I think the Ints look pretty cool. And again, at this timeline, in the Second Age, there probably were Ints in this general part of Middle-earth, in particular the Ent wives. I think I talked about that aspect in my review of the episodes 1 through 3. So then, Arondir communes with the Ent wife, which I actually don't hate this scene, purely because in the lore, the elves were the first ones, or they're the ones that taught the Ents how to speak. So the Ents were sentient beings, but the elves were the ones that kind of taught them how to speak and communicate. So it actually makes sense that Arondir, speaking Elvish, the Ent would know it. So again, it's for every tiny little like granule of accuracy that this show gives us, there's like 20 incorrect or just blatant ignoring of the lore, and which makes this all the more frustrating because some of these like scenes or lines of dialogue are actually genuinely good, and it's like, well, whoever's writing those scenes or writing those the lines of dialogue, please keep that person on board and have them write more, because I guess the rest of the writing team don't know what they're doing. So again, I will give some praise to the show when there is stuff to praise. Unfortunately, it's very, very little and few and far between. I don't know how Estrid's still alive, because that Ent wife just smacked her with pretty good force, and then she gets knocked against the boulder. So if she's, I guess realistically, okay, even if she survives that, she's probably going to have a lot of broken bones and probably some internal bleeding, but actually she just gets up like nothing happened at all. Maybe a little winded, and that's it. No bruises, no broken bones, no internal bleeding, not on the verge of death, nothing. Just, she's fine. And I don't understand like why Isildur likes Estrid, because I mean, they seemed friendly enough when they first met, outside of her stabbing him. but clearly she's kind of shady, and he just immediately overlooks that. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, you were like a follower of Adar, but you're cool now. I trust you because, yeah, you're pretty, I guess. So Arndir and Theo part ways after Theo gets rescued, and I really hope that this is the end we see of Theo because he's one of the most obnoxious characters in this show, which is saying a lot because almost everyone is very obnoxious. I don't know if he's quite as bad as Galadriel or pretty much anything to do with like the Harfoots and Hobbits, but he's up there. He was definitely one of the worst parts of season 1. So hopefully this is the last we see of him in season 2. And also just in general, I don't know where that character's story goes. He just seems unimportant at this point. Not that he was all that important in the first season, but digress. So then we get to see the Orc army marching, and again, they fast travel pretty quick from Mordor all the way to Regen, and it's shocking that the elves are just now finding out about this Orc army, because that's a lot of ground to cover, and surely someone, whether it be like other small human settlements, other elvish settlements, surely someone would have detected a pretty large Orcish force on the march. And, I mean, they're not being subtle about it. They're, like, banging their war drums and everything. They've even got a big troll. But, this show is just so poorly written that I guess... Yeah, and again, they fast travel, so how can you detect fast travel when you can just, boop, there you go. You're in Eregion now for Mordor in 5 seconds. Ugh. Then Galadriel uses the ring to heal Red Shirt Elf Dude. And so here's... Another thing, too, with the Rings of Power is they... Again, with Tolkien's magic, it's very soft magic. Like, he doesn't explain a whole lot of how it works, but that's kind of the beauty of his magic system, is it's very vague, and even... You could even argue that, like, maybe it's not magic at all, because basically the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings are told from the perspective of the Hobbits. Obviously, the Hobbits had never left their homes before. They never left the larger world. So as they're seeing a lot of this stuff take place in, again, both the Hobbit book and then the Lord of the Rings, what they could perceive as magic is... Or maybe it is magic, but it's not as grandiose as what we're seeing it as the audience through the Hobbit's eyes. But the Rings of Power, though, even though they do help prevent decaying, and I guess in a way are kind of healing in that sense, I don't know if they were able to, like, heal in the sense of, like, healing wounds. Because Elrond was already a talented healer without his Ring of Power. That just kind of... Basically, the Rings of Power, regardless of which ones, whether it be the Elvish ones, the Dwarvish ones, the Rings of Men, and of course the One Ring, they more or less just enhance the abilities and strengths of its wearers. That's why the Hobbits are able to turn invisible, because they're already very small, very stealthy, so it just enhances their ability to just vanish. So, I mean, I don't know. Again, it's one of those weird things where, in a sense, I can kind of see where they're going with. I just don't know how I feel about, like, them, just any of the elves wearing one of the rings and just basically putting the ring over top a wound and just, healing it like that. So I don't know. That I didn't love that. And again, I think that's maybe a little too literal of like a translation of like the healing elements of the rings. But whatever, it's open to interpretation. Didn't hate it like a lot of other things in this episode and just this show in general. But I felt like it was worth pointing out. So then Galadriel decides to do this one-woman stand against all these orcs, and these have got to be some of the most incompetent orcs, because it's a whole army fighting Galadriel, and not one of them seems to be able to land a blow. A lot of them are just kind of standing there, like, looking around at the stuff that's happening. None of them are bothering to, like, take action to try to, like, surround Galadriel. She only gets captured by Adar, because, of course, he's the main antagonist of this series for whatever reason, even though it should be Sauron. But yeah, some of the most incompetent orcs. Like, they might as well be stormtroopers from Star Wars. where they can't hit anything, and they're just kind of there as fodder. Because at least the orcs in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits, the Hobbit movies, or slash the Hobbit book, Lord of the Rings books, even though they were fodder, they're at least a bit more of a menacing presence for in a lot of cases. But anyways, digressing. And then moving on to the last scene where Galadriel gets captured by Adar, and man, it's one of the few. Like, I really shouldn't be rooting for the villains, but ever since Season 1, I've basically been rooting for Sauron and any evil being to just kill everybody. Because none of the characters are really all that likable. There's not a whole lot of development for any of these characters. They're just very one-dimensional. And another problem with this series is everything's driven by the plot. Like, the plot is dictating, like, okay, this character has to go here. This has to happen. And granted, that's kind of a structure with a lot of stories anyways. But usually it's the characters who are driving the plot and the story forward, whereas I feel like, again, since the Rings of Power is written by a lot of incompetent writers, the plot is dictating what happens, and that's why, to me, the whole story feels so forced, with all this manufactured drama, all this just nonsensical stories, and just lack of character development, or really anything of interest at all. But anywho, that wraps up Episode 4, which I think might be the worst episode of the season. Maybe the worst episode of Rings of Power so far. And that's saying a lot, because this show is awful. Awful. And even taking the egregious lore changes and unnecessary lore changes out of the equation, like if I took my Tolkien hat off, and I'm just viewing this as like, alright, this is just a generic fantasy show, it still suffers from horrible writing, horrible pacing. So even if this is just, again, take all the Tolkien stuff out of it, if this was just a generic show, or if I knew nothing about Tolkien, this show still fails on a fundamental level because of its just poor storytelling, bad script, bad dialogue, and again, very, very poor pacing. And that's been my biggest problem with this show. Because, again, I can, to a degree, separate myself from, like, what I know of the books, the lore, and all that stuff. Because, again, the Lord of the Rings definitely changed some things. Nothing super egregious, but they definitely, Peter Jackson and his team definitely did change a lot of stuff from the books. But a lot of the changes made sense, and I'm okay with the way things panned out overall. But this show is just awful. Awful. But yeah, that ends my review of episode 4. It's probably the worst. Oh, and we're only halfway through. And I don't think this show can end soon enough. And the reason, I'm sure some people might be asking, like, why I'm bothering to keep up with this show, since I clearly disdain it so much, or despise it, is because as a Tolkien fan, I feel like it's my responsibility to call something out and be like, this is not Tolkien. And I'll do the same thing with the War of the Rohirrim, which I'm a lot more optimistic about. But if that turns out to be just as bad, I will call it out for all of its flaws. But again, I'm hoping for the best. But I feel like it's my responsibility as a fan to basically hold the creators accountable for calling this the Lord of the Rings, when this clearly is not. It's a fanfic, that's all it is. And basically Amazon just purchased the rights to basically buy a fan base, and they failed spectacularly at buying the fan base of Tolkien lovers all across the world. But before I continue to ramble on, that wraps up this video. Leave your thoughts below, do the usual YouTube-y stuff of liking, commenting, subscribing, and whatever. So until next, everyone, cheers.